Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, getting back active in the transfer portal, landing one of the more coveted offensive tackles from UNC, Diego Pounds. And this is a guy that has played a ton of football in the ACC, over 466 pass blocking snaps, only gave up 13 pressures. And Dill, this gets back to the conversation that we've had for the last couple of weeks with Ole Miss. Where did they need to improve to make that next step, to close that gap between Georgia and Alabama? It's along the line of scrimmage. And we know they've crushed it on the defensive line. A guy like Diego Pounds at 6'6", 335 pounds is going to be one of those guys that helps you match up with the likes of Georgia and Alabama along the line of scrimmage. A guy that's a really good pass protector, a mauler in the run game, and a really nice get for Ole Miss. Again, we say this all the time. It is hard to find starting caliber tackles that are available in the transfer portal. Diego Pounds starting all 12 games for North Carolina last year. Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, they found one. Want to talk Diego Pounds, talk about a few more emerging targets for Ole Miss in the transfer portal, then have a little conversation about Quinshon Judkins, what that means for Ole Miss. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the Ole Miss fans. You know the boys have had an absolute blast talking Lane Kiffin, this Ole Miss program in the transfer portal the last couple of weeks. We've been updating you guys on a ton of commitments. We've been having a blast doing it. Cannot thank you guys enough for all the support you guys have shown the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, you enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I know you're familiar with Diego Pounds. Get us started here. I'll give you the tee box. What is Diego Pounds bringing to this Ole Miss offensive line here?
I mean, frankly, what I really like is the fit. I mean, you look at what the offense they like to run in North Carolina and Ole Miss. I mean, North Carolina, another team that I think is perceived as being a pass first, not very physical. But that last year, they really wanted to establish the run, and he was a huge part of that. And I think, again, you kind of look at what Ole Miss maybe was lacking a little bit last year was the ability to play really physical up front. And at 6'6", 335 pounds, plays really good in space in the run game and can move guys. And I just think that was one of the big things you saw against both Alabama and Georgia. And what Lane Kiffin obviously pointed out is we need to be tougher on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I think this guy immediately comes in and gives them a much more physical presence at one of the tackle spots.
100% agree. And like a lot of like the national media and some not casual college football fans that don't necessarily follow Ole Miss assume that they just want to chuck the football all around the yard. This was an Ole Miss team that the last 2 years wanted to run the football, and they've run the football extremely successfully. But when they do go up against those teams like Alabama and Georgia that are just kind of on another level in terms of the physicality they bring along the line of scrimmage, you see the run game maybe struggle a little bit. Diego Pounds is one of those guys that you bring in those games against Alabama and Georgia where you want to continue to run your offense, but you're going up against a front seven that's just a little bit more physical than the other teams you see in the SEC. Will certainly let that happen. And Dill, what pops out for me with Diego Pounds, as much as he is a road grader in the run game, he moves bodies, he gets to the second level, really, really good pass protector too in terms of like the traits he has. I mean, 6'6", 335 pounds, pretty good athlete in terms of working in space. Now, you noted maybe working a little bit and kind of cleaning up some of the things. This is a guy that's only going into his fourth year of college football. And again, in a college football world where we're talking about fifth, sixth, seventh year guys, Diego Pounds, relatively young, has a couple of years of eligibility to use at Ole Miss, a guy that I think will be very good in 2024, but a guy that I think there's still some meat left on the bone in terms of what he can be for Ole Miss heading forward.
I mean, if they just clean up the pass protection, like kind of fundamentals a little bit, I think you're looking at a very much an NFL player because, you know, like he's got the traits, he's shown it, he's been very productive in college football. And again, it's just continuing to improve. And you're right, it's not a very old player at this point in his career and in a team in Ole Miss that you got a lot of guys who have made a lot of improvements at that line of scrimmage, especially on that offensive side where, again, you kind of think back a couple years ago, they were getting mauled, I would say, up front. And you just noticed when they went and played Alabama, Georgia, some of those more physical teams, they really didn't look like they could hang. They could hang this year. I think adding him into this lineup will be really good because, again, I think he's plug and play because he's played in almost the exact same scheme. running scheme is very similar, a very much spread attack, but likes to be physical from that spread look and the ability to play in space. So I think immediately comes in and gives them at least depth, if not a very much an upgrade at one of the spots.
I think he could be a really quality starting tackle in the SEC. Another guy that Ole Miss is gunning for here is former starting offensive tackle from Tennessee, Gerald Miny. And then again, what I continue to say is it's hard to find starting caliber guys. And Ole Miss is seeming to do that at that offensive tackle position. A guy like Gerald Miny, I think you can use very similar conversations around Diego Pounds. Like really, really big, extremely physical. Now, I don't know if he's necessarily the athlete that Diego Pounds is at the size, but what you're getting with a guy like Gerald Miny, I mean, uber physical. This is a guy that wants to get downhill. He wants to be physical. He wants to move bodies on the line of scrimmage. Whether Gerald Miny comes in, starts or not, he's a guy that's played left tackle. He's a guy that's played right tackle. And for Ole Miss, the goals that you have going into the college football playoffs, winning an SEC championship, you need to have depth on that offensive line. A guy like Gerald Miny could give you a quality starting tackle. He's done it at Tennessee, but also a guy that gives you some really, really good depth in that room as well.
I mean, Miny gives you a lot of versatility, I think, is what you're looking for.
Yes.
And you're kind of seeing the trend of what Ole Miss wants to do. Bring in big physical guys. And that's Lane Kiffin said it pretty much right after that Georgia game. We can match up athletically with them. We just need bigger, physical, tougher guys. And again, you mentioned Diego Pounds, very obvious, big physical player. Gerald Miny, same thing. Another guy who was in a very run-heavy scheme at Tennessee this year and proved that he's very capable of moving guys around, pushing good defensive linemen around, and playing with that physical edge. And again, I think this guy can line up pretty much any position on the field. I mean, he can clearly play guard in my mind. And for Ole Miss, that's kind of the big thing you're looking for, is just more competitive depth in that offensive line room, and guys who can be physical and play more tough in that run game against really good.
That's funny you mentioned guard, because I thought the same thing. Like, I think Gerald Miny could be a really good guard, because I don't know if he quite has the athleticism to play tackle. I think he does. He showed he does at Tennessee. He started games at both right and left tackle. I think he'd be an awesome guard. And, like, it's never a bad problem. It's an easy transition. Wondering if that's where they make the move with a guy like Gerald Miny, if he ends up committing to Ole Miss. And the last guy I want to talk about, and we won't spend too much time because we've already mentioned him with Ole Miss, is former five-star offensive tackle Lance Herdt. And again, 6'4", 340. These guys are bringing in big dogs along the line of scrimmage. Now, Lance Herdt is going to be a tough get. He is one of the more coveted, if not the most coveted offensive tackle available in the portal. Ole Miss going to make a run at him. Tennessee, Oklahoma also playing a role. I just love to see Lane Kiffin looking at this team and say, yeah, there's not a lot of teams that can match us on the perimeter, right? You talk about Trey Harris, you talk about Juice Wells and Jackson Dart and all the talent that they're going to have. He's seeing, all right, what's that one area where we need to take that step? It's along the line of scrimmage. He's addressed it on the defense. He's looking to address it on the offense. Certainly did with Diego Pounds. Still another guy that's an absolute road grader in Lance Herdt would be another massive addition.
I mean, again, just being able to play on that line of scrimmage at the level I think you need to. And you saw Lance Herdt. He's not really transferring for the wrong reason. I mean, He wants to play offensive tackle. LSU has two guys who might be first-round tackles. He would be one of those guys that's coming over for the right reasons. I think wants an opportunity to compete in that Ole Miss. I certainly think he'd have it, because when you saw him playing at that right tackle spot in the limited reps he got for LSU, you just noticed, like, this guy's different. He's only a freshman.
I think he'd be the best offensive lineman on this Ole Miss team. And that's saying something, because I actually like this Ole Miss offensive line. That's just how good I think Lance Herdt is.
I mean, he's probably a top 10 offensive tackle easily, I think, in the country next year as a sophomore.
He's going to make a massive jump. He's already an extremely good player. And I think LSU losing him I'm just surprised they couldn't make something work. Because, like, this is a guy that's just too talented to let go hit the portal. Last guy I want to talk about before we get to Judkins, Dayquan Wright. And for the Ole Miss fans that remember way back when we started cultivating our wish list for Ole Miss, this was mid-December, early December. Dayquan Wright was a name I mentioned as being a perfect fit for this Ole Miss team. Now, he was quiet for the first month of the transfer portal, going to be taking a visit to Ole Miss this weekend, 6'4", 250, really productive first 2 years at Virginia Tech in an offense that just did not want to throw the football at all. Dill, the kicker for Dayquan Wright. I have Caden Prescorn is going to be like your kind of blocking physical tight end. Though at 250, Dayquan Wright came out of high school running an 11-second 100-meter dash. I mean, faster than a lot of wide receivers that are going to be on this roster. You talk about matchup nightmare in terms of size and speed and offensive weapon. Like Lane Kiffin would love to get this kid into this offense.
I mean, frankly, I almost feel like he's what they wanted Michael Trigg to be. And obviously with the Michael Trigg thing, it just never felt like it worked out. But you're kind of right. Prescorn's really good at what he does, but he's not that ultra dynamic tight end that I think Lane Kiffin could do a lot of things with and make things happen with. So again, to add a guy who kind of broadens that tight end room skill set, which you just didn't, it wasn't super broad because Caden Prescorn is what he is. And that's not a bad player, but he's a physical inline tight end who can make catches in traffic, but he's not going to take the top off the defense or beat you up in the seams really aggressively. I think Dayquan Wright at least is showing the potential to be that guy and kind of give him what I think they thought Michael Trigg was.
Yeah, and it's like not even close to being a knock on Caden Prescorn, who I think is like one of the best tight ends in the country. It's just like another dimension to that tight end room. A guy that, I mean, one of the more like physically athletic tight ends you'll see, I think would be a perfect fit at Ole Miss. Still, I want to round out this conversation talking about Judkins. I would love to hear the Ole Miss fans and what they think in the comment section. I've been putting a lot of thought into this, and I'm not going to get up here and make this argument that Ole Miss is a better team without Judkins. Obviously, you've heard some of the locker room stuff that might have gone on. Quinshon Judkins was a blast to watch. I had a blast watching him at Ole Miss for the first 2 years, but I think about it like this. You have a certain amount of resources to use to build your roster. Was Quinshon Judkins going to be the guy that puts Ole Miss over the top? Because we kind of consistently said this offense is going to go through Jackson Dart, Trey Harris, Juice Wells. Judkins would make this team better. There's no doubt in my mind. But when you talk about Judkins or adding a guy like Walter Nolan and Diego Pounds, you're taking the line of scrimmage guys over Judkins, I think, any day of the week.
And I think a lot of that, frankly, is Ulysses Bentley really started to close that gap last year where it was, I mean, I wasn't totally sure he shouldn't have been playing more football because, again, Judkins had a solid year. I don't think he made quite the jumps we maybe thought he was going to from his freshman year to his sophomore year. And, again, a lot of that is he did take a lot of snaps, obviously, and there's like a level of getting worn down when you take it all. But I thought, again, Bentley, I thought could have been played a fair amount more. I thought he had a lot of electricity, probably a step quicker, frankly, and maybe a little more dynamic in what Lane Kiffin wants to do in terms of spreading it out and being able to operate in space. I mean, I just think it's Bentley closing that gap and making it not very clear who that number one guy was because Bentley had a great year.
Yeah, I mean, I
don't want to say you're probably right. Judkins was still probably the guy, but I just think Bentley. I mean, it wasn't like a one.
And I know they like Riscano a lot too, and I guess it just to me it comes down to like I'm not going to make the argument like Quinshon Judkins is one of the best running backs in the country. Probably was the best running back in the SEC last year. My argument is not this Ole Miss team is better off without Judkins. It's certainly not, but it's kind of like you got your resources. You got to allocate them the right way. And you know, I'm taking Walter Nolan, I'm taking Diego Pounds, I'm taking Princely U, Tyler Barron over Judkins any day of the week because we talk about closing the gap. You got to win the line of scrimmage if you're Ole Miss. And I think getting guys like Walter Nolan and Diego Pounds makes this team in a better spot. Now, I'm interested to see if they add a running back. I mean, obviously, Ulysses Bentley coming back is massive. He averaged over a yard more per carry than Judkins in 2023. I wonder if they add another running back. I know they really do like Riscano, who, again, Lane Kiffin's been really good at recruiting the running backs from the high school ranks. We'll see where they go, but I did want to give you guys some of our takes on Judkins. Massive get for Ole Miss, getting Diego Pounds in the ship again. This team continuing to build the trenches. This is a team that's going to be a threat in 2024. We'll continue to update you guys as the commitments continue to roll through. Lane Kiffin probably not done yet in the portal. Appreciate the Ole Miss fans for rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.